in the 2013 series on adaptation planning and resilient infrastructure. My name is Laura Kavanaugh from the Resilient Cities team at the ICLE World Secretariat in Bonn, Germany, and I will be hosting the webinar today. First, a quick technical note. We will keep all participants muted for the duration of the session to minimize background noise. If you have a question or are having technical difficulties, please send us a message in the question chat box at the bottom of your control panel to the right of your screen. These messages will be visible to the organizers. For those of you who don't know about us, I would like to start with a brief introduction to ICLE and the webinar series. ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainability, is a membership organization for local governments around the world with over 1,000 member cities in 84 countries. We promote local action for global sustainability and support cities from our global, regional, and country offices with targeted programs and events. ICLE convenes the annual Global Forum on Urban Resilience Adaptation and Change. There's Resilient Cities here in Bonn every spring ahead of the UNFCCC talks. These webinars focus on the selection of key themes from our 2013 Resilient Cities Forum, showcasing selected Congress speakers. Webinars keep the dialogue going and provide a resource for those unable to attend the Congress while looking ahead to 2014. I would like to mention now that our call for contributions for the 2014 Congress program is currently open online and has recently been extended upon request to December 10th, 2013. You may submit under the themes of adaptation planning and policy, resilient infrastructure and city region support systems, or on one of the many other topics related to urban adaptation and resilience. In today's webinar, we will discuss regional and multi-sector approaches to developing urban adaptation strategies and resilient urban infrastructure. Our agenda includes 2 presentations, totaling about 30 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15-minute question and answer session. Susanna Kankanpää from the Helsinki Region Environmental Services Authority will discuss the Helsinki Metropolitan Area Adaptation Strategy and how regional policies are being developed and coordinated across multiple sectors, from land use and building to health and safety. Stefan Denig from Siemens Global Center of Competent Cities will show how data, technology, and smart investment can be used to build resilient infrastructure in cities and regions, using case studies from cities around the world, including New York. Please hold your questions until the end. You can type them in as we go along, and we will read them out at the end. When doing so, please indicate which speaker the question is for, and if you like, the name of your organization. We invite you to type in any relevant comments or experiences that we can share with the audience and the presenters as well. As previously mentioned, please type in any technical questions so we can help you sort them out. To get things started, I would like to introduce my colleague, Eva Jackson, Acting Director of ICLE Canada, who will provide a brief introduction to the topic.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting me to give this short introduction to this webinar today. Well, long before the latest disaster in Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and we had our own disasters here in North America, Superstorm Sandy, of course, and other multi-billion-dollar weather-related disasters such as the floods in Alberta and right here in Toronto where I'm based. But since before that, public leaders and insurers have been taking a closer look at how to protect cities and build resiliency to the impacts of climate change. I think increasingly frequent and intense extreme weather events are damaging and destroying engineering works that have been designed to be operated safely and reliably for several decades. Trillions of dollars of existing and aging infrastructure, as well as new designed infrastructure, are at increased risk. Canada's infrastructure and buildings experience billions of dollar damage each year from severe weather and slow onset climate events. Change in the climate threatens to increase the risk of damage to infrastructure and buildings that have not been designed for our emerging climate. Damage to this infrastructure and buildings in turn can result in loss of life, injuries, and significant disruptions in economic activity. Much of the expected loss and damage to infrastructure and buildings is preventable, though, through appropriate design, construction, and maintenance, and I think that is exactly what we're here on this webinar to discuss. Climate change has become one of those defining issues of our time, and communities from across the country continue to experience the effects of that. Not only across the country, I speak from my perspective here at ICLE Canada, but of course internationally, communities are already feeling those changes. And we believe that cities have a key role to play in mitigating the causes and adapting their communities to the effects of a changing climate. As the level of government closest to residents, municipalities are well positioned to develop effective strategies and to promote the health of people and the livability of communities. And with regard to today's webinar, through protecting and investing in infrastructure. We at ICLEI Canada have become what we'd like to say is a leader and authority in climate change adaptation here in Canada and increasingly internationally as we're attuned to the unique needs of municipalities. Our main priority area in the field of adaptation is our Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities, or BARC, suite of solutions, which helps provide an array of tools for municipalities, be they a full-fledged program, our BARC online tool, and other resources to increase adaptive capacity in a cost-effective and accessible way for the variety of municipalities here. But one thing I'd like to touch on quickly, I have about 30 seconds left, is an effort that we undertook with Ceres and ClimateWise, where we worked to convene insurance leaders and city stakeholders to a series of workshops that were called Building Climate Resilience in Cities. And the effort here was focused at adding not to the historic precedents that cities have undertaken and civic leaders have undertaken in climate resilience, and add to that layer of insurance professionals, noting that faster and larger scale investment and behavior change is needed to ensure cities are prepared for future risks. There's two publications that came out of that. One is called Building Climate Resilience in Cities, Priorities for Collaborative Action. And that's a concise summary document that outlines top concerns to catalyze and expand cross-sector collaboration. And the other, a more in-depth look at the issues called Building Resilient Cities from Risk Assessment to Development, which explains in much greater detail, as I said, a new strategic planning framework called the Resilience Zone, which was introduced and explored during those multi-city workshops. What I'll do is I'll make the links to these available via the chat box, as well as the email that I believe Laura and the World Secretariat can send out. So without further ado, I'll leave our speakers to explore the issue of infrastructure and resilience and adaptation planning in more detail. And of course, my colleagues here at ICLEI Canada are available if there's any questions you'd like to direct to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. And yes, we're chatting the webpage now, and she'll also include the links for you. Now, please await our first presenter, Susanna Kankanpää. Susanna is a climate specialist at the Helsinki Region Environmental Services Authority, a regional authority that provides water and waste management services for the inhabitants of Helsinki metropolitan area. It also produces information about the area, climate, and environment, and coordinated the preparation of the 2012 Helsinki Metropolitan Area Climate Adaptation Strategy. Susanna acted as a coordinator for this process. The strategy is a joint effort of the metropolitan area cities, regional authorities, and other actors in which policies to prepare the metropolitan area for the consequences of climate change are compiled. Helsinki Region Environmental Services Authority will monitor the implementation of the strategy and the adaptation in the region in general. Susanna, please begin when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Hello everybody from Helsinki, Finland, and thank you for inviting me to present in this webinar. So my subject today is the Helsinki Metropolitan Area Adaptation Strategy and the development and implementation of regional adaptation policies. Next slide, please. So first let me introduce the Helsinki Metropolitan Area. It consists of 4 cities, Helsinki, the capital, and the surrounding cities of Espoo, Vantaa, and Kauniainen. Together they have over 1 million inhabitants, which is about 1/5 of the population of Finland. The metropolitan area is a concentration of jobs, administration, business, finances, research, investment, and infrastructure in the country. The area has therefore special characteristics which have to be taken into account when developing adaptation strategies and policies for the area. But because of these characteristics, the area also has great potential to be a forerunner in adaptation in Finland. Next slide, please. So Finland is a northern country with a climate that varies quite a lot naturally. Finns are therefore accustomed to changing weather conditions and extreme weather. Years are seldom brothers here, as we used to say. But the future climate will, however, be more unpredictable and possibly unprecedented. We have to prepare and adapt to warmer and wetter climate and increasing extreme weather events such as heavy rains and winter storms. Helsinki and Espoo are situated on the coast of the Baltic Sea, and sea level rise and storm surges will affect them also in the future, and likely the sea floods will become more frequent than today in the future. Next slide, please. Even though from the global point of view, Finland may not face the most dramatic consequences of climate change, at least not in the next few decades, the urban environment and infrastructure are still vulnerable to the impacts of weather and climate. We have highly developed infrastructure and technical networks on the functioning of which the cities and the society are very much dependent. Therefore, even shorter power or network cuts will cause large problems. In the urban environment, there are also large areas of sealed surfaces and underground infrastructures and networks. They are all vulnerable to heavy rains, heavy snowfalls, storms, and sudden sea level rise and flooding. We have experienced all these in the past years in Helsinki, so we are somewhat prepared for those, but in the future we expect all of these to increase. Next slide, please. So the adaptation strategy was developed for the Helsinki metropolitan area, but the operating environment is much larger and comprises the Helsinki region with altogether 14 municipalities and even the Uusimaa region with 28 municipalities. There are also regional authorities operating in the region. I work in the Helsinki Region Environmental Services, which provides water and waste management for the metropolitan area. There is also regional public transportation authority serving the area, and the regional level land use planning is the responsibility of the Uusimaa Regional Council. So there are many actors in adaptation at the local and regional levels. Next slide, please. The larger picture of strategic adaptation framework has even more actors. At the EU level, there is the relevant legislation and the EU strategy. The flood directive has proved to be effective in starting planning and actions at the local level. The flood risk management planning is progressing now, and it is a good example of cross-border and sector cooperation. We had this type of flood risk planning. Well, it was planned that the planning should start, but the directive really initiated this work. So the Finnish National Adaptation Strategy is being updated now. The renewed strategy may have a more local and regional approach, but so far that remains to be seen. We've had a national adaptation strategy in place since 2005, but it has not steered or supported the local or regional actions so far, but they have all been voluntary and carried out on the city's or region's own initiative. In the Helsinki metropolitan area, we have the metropolitan regional strategy, but there are also city-level plans and programs. There are also other plans, such as the city and rescue services preparedness plans, that also deal with adaptation issues, even though their main focus is on other issues. Next slide, please. The Helsinki Metropolitan Area Adaptation Strategy is a joint effort of the cities, regional authorities and other regional actors, such as the rescue services. The strategy focuses on the regional issues and concentrates on the urban and built environment. The focus of the strategy are cross-border impacts and policies and cooperation between cities, sectors and different levels of government. Preparation work of the strategy was done in close cooperation with the cities and other actors. During the process, we had interviews, carried workshops, we had commenting rounds, and a steering group of key actors in adaptation in the area steered the whole work. The strategy presents strategic starting points and policy guidelines for adaptation in the metropolitan area. There is a link where you can find, in the slide, where you can find the adaptation strategy also in English. Next slide, please. So there are 7 strategic starting points for climate change adaptation, of which I will here highlight 2. First, mainstreaming of adaptation to normal processes and actions was seen as important and necessary. A separate program or strategy is not enough and might not work, but adaptation needs to be part of everyday planning and actions in the sectoral and cross-sectoral operations. And to reach this, support from decision-making, strategic planning, and also legislation is needed. Second, the role of the public sector is important in building cooperation with different actors and stakeholders, and in sharing climate-related information with different organizations. Next one, please. So the strategy introduces shorter-term policies for 7 sectors or cross-sectoral issues, which you can see here. They include land use, transport and technical networks, building, water and waste management, rescue services and safety, social and health services, and cooperation in producing and communicating information. These are all general policies that are described in the strategy, and they need to be developed into concrete actions and projects. This work has started in many sectors, partly as implementation of the strategy, but partly also because of other initiatives, programs, and developments. Next one, please. In the municipalities, climate work is starting to be mainstreamed, and it is becoming part of everyday work, at least in some sectors. But however, as adaptation is still pretty much a voluntary action and so far does not get support from the national level, decision makers are also cautious in making large and costly decisions and rather prefer to wait still a little more. But in the strategy work, the next step will be monitoring and implementation of the policy, monitoring of the implementation of the policies. Helsinki Region Environmental Services will monitor the implementation and also follow other adaptation actions in the region. As there is quite a lot happening in adaptation in Finland, both at national and local levels, and there's also new research information pouring in. We try to filter part of this information and report it in a useful form for our stakeholders, which are the cities and other regional actors. Next one, please. Finally, some conclusions and lessons learned so far. So the plan or the strategy is only a piece of paper if it does not get implemented. So we feel that the process with which the strategy was prepared was therefore maybe more important than the end product itself. It is very important to involve key actors in the preparation process. They will more readily implement something they have prepared themselves rather than something given to them as a ready product. Awareness raising is important, but clearly it is not enough. The level of awareness is quite high in the Helsinki area, but what we really need are changes in behavior, and there is the question of how to get those happening. Thirdly, risk management is the key. We live in a constantly changing environment and climate, and we need to prepare for that. But as you cannot prepare for everything, you have to decide to what level of risks you prepare for and how large risks are still acceptable. Fourthly, responsibilities in adaptation in Finland are not clear yet. Mostly they have not been clearly defined, and that is one reason why there is little resources allocated for adaptation as well. Fifthly, adaptation concerns largely local or regional solutions and actions, but impacts and therefore actions do not respect sectoral or administrative borders, and cooperation between different sectors is necessary. This is, however, not always easy, though, as for example, easy because, as for example, interests and sense of urgency may differ. Adaptation has also brought new actors to the field that previously was mostly taken care of by the environmental staff. New actors bring along new ideas and ways of working which could lead to innovation and solutions. As of implementation, lastly, as for implementation of any strategy, support of the decision makers is key. The state government could also have an important role in supporting and enhancing local and regional level adaptation by, for example, providing regulatory framework, guidance, and coordination. The last slide, please. So, with this Novemberish picture of Helsinki, I finish my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Susanna. That was a very nice overview. We will now move on to our second speaker, Stefan Denig. And just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please enter them into the question box so that we can collect them for the Q&A session. Stefan is the Vice President of Siemens Global Center of Competent Cities. He leads Siemens' research program on sustainable infrastructure and resource efficiency in urban agglomerations. A comprehensive stakeholder research on urban infrastructure in the world's largest cities was published at the 2007 World Economic Forum in Davos, titled Megacity Challenges, A Stakeholder Perspective. Stefan also leads the development of the first sustainability ranking of Europe's major cities, published at COP15 and rolled out globally with subsequent reports on other world regions. Stefan has communication and thought leadership for the Crystal in London, a sustainable cities initiative by Siemens that explores how we can create a better future for our cities. It houses the world's largest exhibition on urban sustainability and is open to the public since 2012. Stefan, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks very much, Laura, for the introduction and a warm invitation actually to all of you who are listening, whoever you are in London. The Crystal, which is not just a place of research and dialogue, it's also an exhibition on the future of cities that covers a lot of topics of sustainable urban infrastructure and resiliency in a pretty neat and fun to visit exhibition here in London. So please, when you're around here in the city, come out to the Docklands and see us. Today I would like to focus in the next couple of minutes on a piece of research we did together with the New York's Regional Plan Association and Arup, the engineering consulting company, where we looked into what technologies and measures are available to make a city's infrastructure more resilient in the light of an increasing frequency of natural disasters. So while Susanna was talking on the regulatory challenges and the challenges of getting our stakeholders involved, I would speak about very concrete and down-to-earth measures of what can be done to make cities' infrastructure more resilient. And that the challenge is there, that the challenges in particular in cities, Eva already highlighted in her introductory remarks, the 75% of the world's cities are located in coastal zones. So they are prone to floodings, they are prone to
If you bear with us for just a second, we'll get the audio back.
US dollars. So action needs to happen in cities, and in particular in the fast-growing cities in the emerging world. If we look at a city such as Ho Chi Minh City, which is growing at a tremendous pace, it had 1 million people in the 1950s. It has 8 million people now. The population is growing by 500,000 people every year, and already today 60% of the city is in a flooding zone and is prone to potential floodings in case of hurricanes or rising sea levels. The city was initially planning to protect the city by building a 170-kilometer dam. That obviously was not possible. The financial investment would have been too large, so the city has to look at other means to protect their infrastructure. But it's not just the cities in the emerging countries, it's even cities in the developed world, such as New York City, that are severely hit by major disasters and major natural hazards. We've all seen the consequences of Hurricane Sandy in New York about a year ago, where half of Manhattan was without power for many weeks, and the overall economic damage that was done to the city amounted to around $15 billion. Is that a one-time event? Clearly not. If we look at the predictions and forecasts of the New York City panel on climate change, on what we have to expect over the next decades, you see it on this slide here. In particular, the number of floodings and heat waves are due to increase significantly. About 7 times as many major flooding events are expected, and 4 times as many major heat waves. All that puts enormous strain on the city's infrastructure, and as seen last year during Sandy, even in a highly sophisticated and highly developed city such as New York, the infrastructure did not cope. The 13th Street substation, which was actually designed to be protected for a 12.5 foot surge, was inundated by the 14 foot surge that Sandy caused. That blew the transformer, and 250,000 customers were without power. Now we've looked into this grid infrastructure and try to identify what can be done to better protect the city's power supply and the city's grid to be better prepared for a similar event such as Sandy. And we've categorized the potential possible action into 3 categories: short-term, medium-term, and long-term investments that could be done and should be done into the grid to make it more robust, more resilient, and more flexible to cope with these risks. Short-term actions, which could be done over the next 4 years or so, would basically mean a better physical protection of the power lines and the transformers and switchgear stations. This could be done by undergrounding lines, by implementing better insulated, gas-insulated switchgear stations, and things like that, anything that would make the system more robust. But much more can be done. In the medium term and in the long term, investments into a smarter and more intelligent power infrastructure can help to make the power grid more flexible in terms of major interruptions. So the city and the utility has better information what kind of power is used and needed in what part of the grid, and in times of, or in the case of major interruptions, power can be shifted from where it is not so necessarily needed to where it is crucially needed, such as hospitals, emergency centers, and other places where power is even, and electricity is even more vital than in shopping centers or parts of the public infrastructure. This can be achieved by introducing smart meters, by introducing sensors, smart grids that give us more intelligence and more insights into what's happening in the grid and give us that kind of flexibility to shift loads in times of a major crisis. Now, what would all this cost? We were not just interested in what's possible, we were also interested in, is it realistic? Is the investment realistic? So these things could be done. And if we do it, how would this investment pay back? We looked into 3 different scenarios to do this cost-benefit analysis. And the 3 scenarios you see in the 3 curves on this slide here. The blue line is a reactive scenario. This scenario shows what would happen if the city only invests into the physical protection and robustness of the grid by flood protection for power plants, waterproof transformers, placing critical lines underground, etc., etc. This is short-term actions which could be done over the next 3 years, and investment for the city would be around $400 million. Now, this obviously would help, as against the backdrop of the increased number and frequency of major natural disasters that is forecast for the next decade. The taxpayers would be losing money if they did nothing, up to $3 billion over the next 20 years. That would be the cost of fixing damage caused by major natural hazards over the next 20 years based on the forecast of frequency of hazards that we saw earlier. The investment of $400 million into the robustness of the grid would mean that $2 billion could be saved in terms of preventing damage to happen. But more can be done. If an additional investment is done into making the grid smarter, more intelligent, more responsive, and more flexible, obviously higher investments would be necessary. These investments would amount to up to $4 billion over the next 12 years. So a substantial investment would be necessary into smart meters, into automated distribution, into power storage to make the grid more intelligent and more flexible. However, if that investment would happen, it would pay back in the long term. And it would pay back not just by averting damage, as shown in the red line. It would also pay back by better capacity, fewer outages, better energy efficiency, and decreased transmission and distribution losses in times of normal operations. And if you add all these benefits up, the reduced damage cost of around $2 billion and additional benefits that would amount to around $4 billion, the city would, in the long run, be saving money instead of losing money. So that's kind of an interesting picture that you see here. Resilience, investments into resiliency of the power grid do protect the city. So you get a better protected city, but at the same time a more efficient and a more reliable power supply in normal times, and the investment would, in the long run, pay back. Now, if we look into more general terms into what this all could mean for cities and whether all that is happening for cities already, we have gathered a lot of examples of existing smart and intelligent investments into resilient infrastructure from cities all around the world in 4 major infrastructure categories that we deem vital to the functioning of a city in times of major disaster. It is the grid, electricity system, it is transportation systems, the water systems, and the city's buildings. And I will just quickly want to guide you with some concrete examples from other cities around the world that can serve as best practice in this field. We've spoken already about the technologies that are available for the increased resiliency of the power grid. One example, and a very advanced and developed example of an intelligent and smart and decentralized grid system that makes the city's grid more robust is in Munich, Germany, where a large number of small-scale distributed energy sources have been pooled through the use of an intelligent distributed energy management system. So the whole system can be operated as one singular power installation. So various modes of energy generation, such as cogeneration modules, solar power, hydropower, and wind farms, can be run in normal times as if they were one big plant, one big power generation plant. But in times of a disaster, they can also be run in a decentralized way, so you don't depend on the entire grid system, but you have independent components that can help protect the system in times of a major discrepancy. And again, this is a system that helps you survive a crisis, but that would also lead to increased efficiency in normal times of operation. Another example for decentralization and increased flexibility through microgrids is the co-op city in the Bronx, a neighborhood there with 14,000 apartments and 60,000 people. This neighborhood had invested into an independent combined heat and power system where electricity, heat, hot water, and air conditioning are generated in an independent system on the ground. During Hurricane Sandy, Co-op City had power as it was independent from the overall grid. But again, this is not just an investment that paid back in times of this major interruption or disruption of the system. It also paid back in normal times as there's excess electricity used here that can be paid sold back to the grid, and the investment paid back after 5 years. Transportation networks, again, there's all kinds of increased smartness, sensors that give us real-time information on the actual status of transportation systems at a given time that help make the city more flexible and that help those who manage the system to react quickly to major disruptions. There is intelligent signaling systems that help improve traffic flow in normal times, but that play a particular role during emergencies, as signaling for emergency vehicles can be prioritized. There is real-time data systems that help increase the flow and frequency of trains in the public transportation systems, but that also help to coordinate evacuation if needed. Some concrete examples: the vehicle-to-infrastructure communication systems in Houston, Texas, a system that was implemented as a response to the rather chaotic evacuation that occurred during Hurricane Ike, which happened there in 2008 and caused and wrought major havoc in the greater metropolitan area of Houston, which has around 4 million residents. The system that has been implemented now is an intelligent system that uses signals by smartphones on standby in cars and is able, based on that information, to very accurately predict traffic flow in the streets of Houston. Around 400 intersections have been equipped with this system, which means that in normal times of operations, traffic lights can be altered dynamically and flexibly, as though traffic flow can be better managed. But in times of an emergency and in evacuation scenario, this system has the additional benefit of being managed in a way so evacuation and emergency vehicles can be led through with priority. So it helps to provide a much faster and more flexible evacuation in times of a crisis. Similar systems for the public transportation system, the Transport Coordination Center in London, which was implemented for the Olympics here, times of almost similar to a major natural disaster in terms of the increased number of people using the system. The real-time data that were provided to a main operations center on the actual status of the traffic on the London public transport systems, the tube and the bus systems, actually helped the transport for to manage increased number of passengers without any major interruption. There was one major signaling failure at a major station, bank station in central London, and due to the very immediate information in the control center that was provided and rerouting of passengers that could happen already 11 minutes after the signal failed. There was no major damage or no major interruption caused to the overall system. Similar things are available for water systems, water management systems. Again, intelligent systems that help detect the leakages in the system through sensors and modern automation and IT systems. One example, the water utility in Sao Paulo, which has introduced a water supply operation control center to manage critical pressure points in the water supply network and ensure effective communication with the rest of the grid and the population in times of water shortages. And if this is also a system that pays back in normal times of operation to increase capacity and efficiency, but helps manage the system, in particular in times of a natural hazard. I leave it here as my time is over. There's many more examples from cities around the world that I could mention here. The main message that I would want you to take home is that resilience, investments into resilience have to be done if a city wants to become and remain competitive. It's not a luxury, it's not a nice to have, it's a reality that most cities in the world will have to face. However, these investments are not just investments into an unknown future. We can predict exactly what kind of hazards and what kind of natural disasters a city will have to face. However, we know it will happen, and if we invest into greater flexibility, redundancy and robustness of the city's major infrastructure areas, this investment will decrease damage in times of a disaster, but it will also increase capacity and efficiency in times of normal operation. So if this thinking of resiliency becomes part of the normal planning and investment cycle, the city can achieve both a better protected city and a more efficient city in normal times. And this is why the investment makes sense for city decision makers, utilities, and transportation companies in all cities around the world. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Some very useful and illustrative examples there of how to build resilience across the different systems that have been mentioned in both presentations. We will now move into the question and answer session with the questions that we've received so far. If you'd like to answer a question, please post it in your chat box in the bottom, and then we can give it to the speakers. We'll start off, we have two questions here from Alex Eilert, one for each speaker. We'll start with one for Stefan. The cost-benefit curve on the full grid resilience seems to show very heavy initial investments with a sharp turning point at around the 10-year mark. Can you give a bit more detail on what is happening there?
Well, obviously, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The investments, we are speaking here about a major investment over the first 6 to 8 years of this cycle will happen first, and the paybacks in terms of increased capacity, decreased transmission losses, increased energy efficiency, an improved environmental footprint of the grid will only come over time, and in particular pay back once the investment has been done. This is why the curve has such a sharp upward trend after the first around 8 years or so. So it is it's just simply a result of the investments need to be done during the first couple of years, and then the full benefits are paying back in the full the cycle of 20 years that we've looked at here. However, one thing I have to mention too, this is a very macroeconomic view that we are taking here. We are looking at overall investments, and we are looking at the overall benefits for a city and its citizens. However, if you get down to a more granular level and look at who needs to invest and who would reap the benefits of the investment, obviously the picture looks quite a bit different. It's not always the case that the investment and the beneficiaries of the investments, or the investors and the beneficiaries of the investment are the same agent. So that's something that you need to bear in mind when you look at this cost-benefit analysis, that it is a macroeconomic point of view, and the challenge is to find business models where we can tie the necessary investment to the benefits more directly, so things happen.
Thank you. And we'll move to Alex's question here for Susanna. Susanna, Alex notes that cross-sectoral partnerships can be challenging to coordinate. Can you share which have been the most difficult and which have been the easiest to organize in your experience?
Finland is a pretty small country, so we have small circles here. It often is about the persons, whether you have a person that is interested in the subject or whether you don't, or then you have a sector where the problems are obvious, where they have faced them already. For example, in our water management, we have problems already with the heavy rains, as do the City of Helsinki departments. So with those where they can see the benefits of adaptation, and especially preparing for the current climate variability, there the coordination is easy. And also in those sectors that are used to doing it, for example, the preparedness planning in Helsinki metropolitan area, they have done cooperation for many years and do that all the time. So for those, they just added one more subject to their item list, so to say. But then it's more difficult with sectors that haven't really faced the problems yet or cannot see them as urgent as other problems. Take, for example, the social services sector. They have a load of stuff they have to do already, so something that is going to happen maybe in 10 to 20 years is not a priority list for them. They are interested, but they really can't find the time or the resources to do that, as there are more urgent items to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. And Stefan, another question on the topic of cost-benefit analysis from Claire Walsh. How can you include other value calculations in your cost-benefit analysis, such as social benefits, environmental benefits, etc.?
We do actually include environmental benefits. We have looked at the benefits that result from the increased greenhouse gas footprint through a more efficient management of the grid. We have, in the long-term scenario, we have included better energy storage capacities in the grid, for instance, with the introduction of e-cars, where the batteries can be used as a means to store energy, so the peaks in times of an increased contribution of renewable energies can be flattened. So we have included these benefits. And you find, if you look into our report, which you find on our website, siemens.com/urban-resilience, you do find quite a detailed analysis of where the benefits come from increased capacity, from better quality of the grid, from decreased transmission losses, more general environmental benefits, safety, quality of life, in terms of value-added electric-related services and things like that. So there's quite a granular deep dive into that. We haven't looked into wider societal benefits, not because we do not believe that this is important, but we've tried to concentrate and focus on where our specific expertise as a technology provider is. So we really look at the infrastructure implementation part of it and the benefits that are directly related to that.
And sort of on the topic here of environmental services, question for Susanna from Josie Close. Food was not mentioned in Helsinki in the sector adaptation. Does this mean Helsinki Metro adaptation is self-sufficient and resilient to food supply disruption? What are your thoughts on urban food resilience?
Yes, that's right. Food was not mentioned, and it's an important issue both from the point of view of mitigation and adaptation and resilience. Well, partly because maybe, well, of course, Helsinki, by the way, is one of the largest agricultural producers in Finland. That's hard to believe, but that's true. But still, we are not, of course, the Helsinki metropolitan area is not reliant on its own production. Why it was not included? Maybe, well, first of all, we just thought about the urban environment and technical infrastructures, and not from the point of view of agriculture and food production, but that is certainly an issue that needs to be considered. And there are also initiatives starting now in Helsinki, not for urban agriculture, but for this whole food production chains and the resilience of that. So that's an issue in the future work for the Helsinki metropolitan area. But a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. And back to Stefan, another question from Josie Close. The distributed generation of small-scale renewables perhaps implies less robust construction to extreme weather events, and is this a contradiction for adaptation strategies?
Did I get that right? That the question was distributed microgrids would be less robust?
Yes, that distributed generation of small-scale renewables might imply less robust construction to extreme weather events.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, it is at the end of the day to make the entire system more resilient. There is different aspects of resiliency that need to be brought into a good balance. One thing is definitely robustness, to build systems that are well protected. Then there is flexibility, and flexibility breaks down into decentralized systems and into more responsive systems that are built on intelligence and better insights into how the system is actually functioning. And obviously there is redundancies in terms of having a backup system in place. And all these components, robustness, redundancy, flexibility, and responsiveness, all those taken together make up an overall resilient infrastructure. And obviously there's sometimes conflicts. For instance, if you make a system too smart and too much dependent on intelligence and sensors and all the data they can provide, and if you neglect robustness and redundancy on the other hand, then the system is prone to a different kind of vulnerability. So it's about the right balance that needs to be struck between all these investments. So decentralization is definitely one important element, as it helps to run the system at least in certain parts when other parts of the system break down. But it's not the one key to the solution. It is the right balance between different approaches that leads to the best possible protection and resiliency of the grid.
Thank you. That's a good point to keep in mind for all adaptation work. Maintaining balance is very key. An open question here, perhaps best for Susanna to start with, from Alicia Natalia Zamudio. What is the role of public sector procurers in facilitating the implementation of adaptation policies and plans?
Yes, it's easy to think of the answer from the point of mitigation, but then for adaptation, yes. Well, that's maybe that's a difficult question to think of right now. Of course, you could always consider the resilience and the adaptation aspects of all the procurement you do, for example, for vehicles and the networks and so on. Maybe that's the point. But then, yeah, that's something that needs to be considered more. Thank you.
Stefan, do you have any thoughts to add on that point?
Sorry, the system was interrupted here. Can you repeat the question to me again, please?
Yes, there we go. What is the role of public sector procurers in facilitating the implementation of adaptation policies and plans, and perhaps in your case in infrastructure projects? And sorry, there's a follow-up here. In terms of mitigation, we're also curious on that point if you have more to say on the mitigation side.
Well, I mean, obviously a lot of these investments have to happen in the public sector. Others happen in the private sector, and in particular when we talk about the resilience of the power grids in most cities of the world, the utilities are either fully privatized companies or they are independent entities which are publicly owned but independently managed. The role of it's less the role of public procurement here, but it is about the public sector setting performance standards, the right regulatory environment, environmental standards that need to be met. Here the public sector plays a major role without, in many cases, being directly the supplier or the investor into those technologies. Obviously, the regulatory framework, the performance targets that are being set to those companies, and performance standards. This is all things that must be supplied by the public sector.
Thank you. And we'll take one last question here. We have a question for you again, Stefan, from Johannes Anhorn, who knows that most of your resiliency measures, such as improving the existing grids, are only applicable in cities which actually have these grids already. So how would your cost-benefit analysis look if grids do not exist and have to be built from scratch? For example, in Kathmandu, which is without a functioning electrical or water grid.
Good question. I can only speculate here, obviously, as we haven't done an in-depth analysis. I mean, there's definitely the same kinds of benefits that can be achieved in terms of efficiency and better capacity if a system is being built from scratch. But I can, at the end of the day, only speculate how that would compare to an existing grid. We see it in many cities in the emerging part of the world that they do really want to make a leapfrog when they invest into technologies, that they want the most advanced and most efficient systems. That's definitely the opportunity there, whereas developed cities with an infrastructure that is often more than 150 years old, such as here in London, where the underground system is celebrating its 150th birthday this year. Cities have to play catch-up because they have gone much faster than what was anticipated when these systems were put into place in the first place. So I would say I can't give numbers how all these things would pay back, but I definitely see those cities who make the investments now at an advantage, as they can much more flexibly implement the most advanced and most efficient systems.
Thank you, Stefan. And as we're coming to the end of our time, we'll leave the question and answer session there. Thank you all for your very interesting questions, and a very warm thank you to Susanna and Stefan as well for sharing their work and their experiences, and for all of you to attending our 5th and final webinar in our series today. We have been recording this webinar, and it will be made available on our website shortly, together with the presentations. If you have missed any of our previous webinars in the series, these recordings are also available online. Lastly, I would like to remind you about the open call for contributions for next year's Resilient Cities Congress, which will be closing just 2 weeks from today on December 10th. Resilient Cities 2014 will be held from May 29th to May 30th in Bonn, Germany. And remind that we will have a follow-up email with additional resources. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like us to forward to the speakers, please send them to our email, resilientcities@iclead.org. Thank you all once again for joining us, and have a lovely day.